pro-cannabis media.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to another edition of Weed Talk Now. I'm Jimmy Young, the founder of Pro-Cannabis Media.
And I'm Curt, Dalton, the founder of Cannabis.net.
And joining us all the way from Alberta in Canada is Dr. Igor Kovalchuk. He is at the University of Lethbridge in Calgary, Alberta. Dr. Kovalchuk, thank you so much for joining us here on a beautiful spring day in the northeast of America.
Thank you for having me, guys.
Tell us a little bit about what you've been up to, because your reputation is one of the premier plant biologists.
We are Pro-Cannabis Media.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to another edition of Weed Talk Now. I'm Jimmy Young, the founder of Pro-Cannabis Media.
And I'm Curt, Dalton, the founder of Cannabis.net.
And joining us all the way from Alberta in Canada is Dr. Igor Kovalchuk. He is at the University of Lethbridge in Calgary, Alberta. Dr. Kovalchuk, thank you so much for joining us here on a beautiful spring day in the northeast of America.
Thank you for having me, guys.
We are Pro-Cannabis Media.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to another edition of Weed Talk Now. I'm Jimmy Young, the founder of Pro-Cannabis Media.
And I'm Curt, Dalton, the founder of Cannabis.net.
And joining us all the way from Alberta in Canada is Dr. Igor Kovalchuk. He is at the University of Lethbridge in Calgary, Alberta. Dr. Kovalchuk, thank you so much for joining us here on a beautiful spring day in the northeast of America.
Thank you for having me, guys.
Tell us a little bit about what you've been up to, because your reputation is one of the premier plant biologists in genetics. And this is the thing that blows me away about the cannabis world, okay, is you guys are this is the smartest group of people I've ever met. The fact that you can actually dictate the DNA of a plant and explain it is unbelievable to me. So first of all, congratulations on getting to the point where you have this reputation of being one of the top premier biologists and plant biologists in the world. Tell us a little bit about this study and why you decided to study COVID-19 and cannabis.
Right. So we have been studying cannabis since about 5 years. So for the past 12 years or so, I worked on medicinal plants, including medicinal poppy. And as soon as cannabis became, let's say, more open in Canada, I thought it would be a great plant to study because, as you know, it provides us with food, feed, shelter, medicine, clothes, you name it, right? That's probably the only plant that you would want to take with you into space if it was the only one you could, right? So, when COVID started, we were well in the way of analyzing medicinal properties of those varieties. We have created almost 1,500 hybrids and analyzed about 400 of them for the anti-inflammatory effects, for anti-cancer effects, anti-aging, skin diseases, oral health, you name it. And when COVID started, as you understand, it's caused by a virus and it's an infection, right? And if it's an infection, cannabis definitely should help, right? And my wife hypothesized that this virus would enter in the same way as SARS virus. At that time, it was late February. There was no such data yet, but we reanalyze the data that we have from multiple experiments that we do. We use so-called 3D tissues, so engineered human 3D tissues that mimic basically your oral cavity, lung epithelia, intestine epithelia. And we analyzed the expression of these receptors that virus potentially need to enter on the surface of the cells. And we indeed identified several extracts that dramatically decrease the expression of the receptor. So to simplify, imagine if you have a house, a building that has 100 doors, and you have a couple thousand people crowd outdoor, and they have to get in there within a minute. 100 doors likely will allow them, right? So, but if you reduce the number of doors to 20, perhaps, right? The chance of entering the same amount of time is very small, and any infection operates by units of infecting agent in time, right? So if you have number of viral units that enter with our cells, there is a chance for infection to progress. If this virus stalled and cannot enter as efficiently, it will be eliminated by immune system. So our immune system operates well if it has enough, either enough time or enough players. Enough players means antibodies. You've been exposed before. Enough time means the rate of infecting agents versus the rate of our system eliminating them. So, and then when we found that in the months, we received the confirmation from the studies abroad that indeed this virus uses ACE2 receptor for entry. And therefore, what we found with cultivars is basically gives us a very high degree of confidence that those cultivars will slow down or decrease the chance of infection, and will slow down the progression of disease for one specific reason, because when the virus enters our cells, it forces all neighboring cells and other so-called target tissues to amplify this receptor. So it's like you got a spy, and spy basically buys off others so that they work in concert, right? So, and basically that's how the virus prepares your target. It may enter through lungs, for example, or oral cavity, and will amplify receptors, your intestine, your kidney, and everywhere else where the target virus is, target tissues is. And in this way, it will force us to succumb to basically disease, get more complications and whatnot. So that's the first study that has been published. It has not been peer reviewed. It right now is in the process of being peer reviewed, but the preprint is out there.
Go ahead, Curt.
Doctor, in your study, you mentioned sativa strains high in CBD. Did you start with like a Charlotte's Web or an AC/DC, or what did you have access to strain-wise to start with?
It's interesting. Most of the names would mean nothing to the reader, right? So because those are not common names, and most of them are created by us, hybrids. We did not, I can confirm that this was not AC/DC or Charlotte's Web that we started with. We started with agnostically completely. So when we profiled 400 varieties for inflammation, we did not pay attention, indica, sativa, high, low CBD, THC. We first checked whether it works, and only then we checked what cannabinoid level is. And we're checking cannabinoids level only for one specific reason, because if the extract works, why should I care what's in it, right? So we know it's safe because through years of consumption, multiple studies, we know that cannabis is safe, right? But I would prefer this variety or strain to be high CBD for one specific reason. If a patient takes it, I want the patients to be comfortable. I don't want the person to take my pill, oil, or whatnot, and get high right away. And some people may be deterred by this, right? So people who may have a disease do not want an additional impairment to happen. That's why we have focused only on those cultivars that would be either 1-to-1 CBD or CBD dominant. We had 2-to-1, 10-to-1, and as high as 20-to-1.
Can I ask? Go ahead, Curt.
Did any of the other cannabinoids really stand out to you as CBN or CBG? Anything that really made your eyes wide open other than CBD?
Right, it's a great question. So most of the cultivars were, as I said, either 1-to-1 CBD to THC or CBD dominant. There was one cultivar that is THCV dominant that does not work as well, but works as well, right? So it's not as efficient, but pretty good. If we talk about single cannabinoids, in our work we found that they work too, but not as efficiently as a full flower extract, right? And as you understand, if you take the full flower extract, you have 50, maybe 60 different cannabinoids and 50, 60 terps, flavonoids, you name it. It would be extremely difficult and long to identify what is active ingredient or what is a cocktail. I believe it's a concerted actions of all molecules. Scientifically, very important to understand how and what works, but if we have COVID out there and this helps, I don't think we should waste time, basically 4 or 5 years of research to identify those single molecules that work.
So a reminder, you are watching and or listening to Weed Talk Now, a podcast produced by Pro Cannabis Media. I'm the founder of Pro Cannabis Media, Jimmy Young, along with my co-host Curt Dalton from Cannabis.net. This podcast and show is available on all those social media outlets out there. So remember to subscribe, share, and like, or don't like if you don't want to. But you know what? We'd prefer you to like this stuff. Anyway, back to the show. So, as I was saying, you mentioned research, Doctor, and, you know, here in the United States, as you know, it's still federally illegal, and there's only one college in the United States, one place that's officially able to research this at the University of Mississippi, and there's been a recent lawsuit here in the United States that was actually won by a research firm exposing the United States for perhaps doing a little something a little shady to keep the researchers at bay. In Canada, because it's federally legal, you actually get grants pretty, I don't want to say easily, because there's never easily getting a grant, but I'm guessing you get some cooperation from your government in Canada for research, yes?
You're absolutely right. So in the past, especially past 2-3 years, there have been a number of grants out there. Yes, the success rate, as for any grants, maybe not high. You know, for some it's 2%, for some it's 10%. But hey, together with Olga, with my wife, we had probably 5 or 6 over the last 3 years. So yes, so if the idea is good, honestly, my gut feeling is there is still some prejudice among the reviewers, right? Because when we reviewed, we're not reviewed and given the grant because it's such a cool plant, but because our scientific hypothesis stands the ground and the experiments proposed are solid and our names are good. And that's the combination that gives you a grant. But even then, sometimes you feel by the comments reviewers do that they're not comfortable with the fact that all these effects are caused by cannabis. But it's changing, so it's getting better and better. You cannot believe in the past 2 weeks how many calls I received from scientists, from doctors. I received calls from doctor from hospitals, from hospital in New York, who is in forefront working with patients. He said that after he has seen an article, he was prescribing CBD and CBG to patients, and all 6 patients, elderly, that he's given are doing extremely well. And I have their emails and their statement basically about that. So.
At one point, Doctor, we had put an article up on Cannabis.net kind of saying, could COVID be cannabis legalization's what if moment? Could we find a medical study that showed that it either lessened the strength, it helped with recovery? Do you feel your study is comprehensive enough or a beginning to that moment in the US where we could say, we need to legalize, we need to study immediately, and this is the beginning. This is the study that shows us it can help.
Right, so a word of caution right away. Our work is so-called preclinical, right? So we do not touch patients. We have not touched patients yet. So we are working right now on several clinical trials, right? So including several US teams. I would, if this would happen, it would basically expedite our applications and everything, right? But I agree. So we have a great opportunity for studies like ours to influence the policy making, and basically hoping that it will be open and decriminalized and whatnot as soon as possible. Sometimes situations like this influence politics, but in most of the cases, politics influence situations.
That wouldn't have anything to do with the almighty dollar by any chance, would it? I'm just saying.
That's all I wanted to say, yeah.
Now, Curt and I are both located here in Massachusetts, where we originate this program. And I understand that there's a local company, MatTech Life Sciences out of Ashland, where you got your 3D tissue samples. Is that accurate?
Absolutely. So it's a wonderful company. And as you know, a lot of studies that you do, in order for these studies to be very valid and close to a real situation, you have to use patients, right? And you can only do it in clinical trials. It means most of the studies are never done. And they're never done because money is a big deal. People who are willing to do studies is a big deal, right? And applications are extremely difficult, right? So clinical trial applications requires concerted actions of many people. It's hundreds of pages document. Preparation of these clinical trials takes months and months. But if instead using 3D tissues, it's a wonderful idea, right? So basically it's an engineered human skin, and they can alveolar epithelial tissues, and they can do it sex specific. So if you suspect that males or females succumb to infection in greater rate, they can generate the tissues of specific disease. For example, we have studied the psoriasis tissues. So they send you engineered tissues that looks like psoriasis skin. You can directly apply the extract and see whether the morphology changes or you change the expression of molecules back to normal. That's how we identified almost a dozen varieties that strains that help to relieve psoriasis, for example.
This study, obviously it exploded in our industry. We're all looking for that study to show how cannabis can help with COVID. But now it's really gone viral. You're getting picked up, this study, and people rewriting and referencing your study all over media. Did you think when this came out, you would get this type of exposure and this type of virility?
Right, Curt, it's a great question, and no, I didn't expect that. So I'll be frank, the reason we put it out there, because we badly needed commercial and industrial partners to move us to clinical trial. So, we could go to the hospital, we found people, doctors who are willing to do the study, but obviously it's an organization, people have to be paid, and clinical trial of this magnitude can be anywhere from $200,000 to $500,000. We do not have this money, but we know this is a medicine that will help. And so it was kind of an outcry. It's very unusual and not in the style of me and Olga. We've been around for a while in science and everything. We don't do this, but the situation is such that we felt if we don't do this, it will be buried for a very long time and never help people. But now, because guys like you and other journalists who picked it up, I have several, probably dozens of leads and 2 solid cases where likely we'll get a clinical trial done.
That's exciting. That is exciting. One of our own medical friends, Dr. Ryan Zachlin, has asked me to ask you this question about 2 specific cannabinoids, a CBDA and a THCA. Now, here's the thing about all the cannabinoids, and I've got some working knowledge of it, but I never took organic chemistry in college, let alone high school. Forget high school. Okay, I didn't even go near biochem labs in high school. But how can you identify each specific cannabinoid and the impact that one has on the other? Or is it more about the ratios of the CBD-based ones versus the THC ones?
Jimmy, it's all of the above, right? So first of all, it's not our intention to identify all cannabinoids, right? So because it was not our intention to understand what works. Why? Because I do not believe that we'll identify one. The ratios likely is important. I give you an example. When we identified several varieties that work well for specific rare cancer, we started doing ratios, let's say from 1 to 16 to 16 to 1. So we've done like profiling of 12 different ratios, and we identified a golden spot where we've seen potentiation, right? That means that if you have one cultivar reduces, let's say, the growth of cancer by, I say, 2-folds, another one 2-folds, put them together, they together were 6-folds, for example, right? So this is quite difficult. It takes a long time, and therefore there are some cases that we know what works. So, for example, when we did colon cancer versus breast cancer, right? And then we found cultivars that work and then don't work. And then we did correlations with level of THC, CBD, and whatnot. And for one cancer, and don't quote me that I don't quite remember, but I believe for colon cancer, we found positive and negative correlations clearly established for specific cannabinoids. But for breast cancer, it was completely irrelevant. So we could not look at the cannabinoids profile and tell whether the cultivar would work or not. Same with terps. We identified a couple terps that correlate very well. So their presence would either help or actually negatively influence the capacity of THC, let's say, to kill the cancer. So my point is that cannabis is not generic whatsoever. You cannot just look at the profile of cannabinoids and say, this will help me or this will not help me. In general, I would say high CBD variety should have anti-inflammatory properties, but we are releasing the paper right now, a second one on the cytokine storm. We identified varieties that dramatically reduce key pro-inflammatory molecules. And we have selected from a number of cultivars that work. We have selected 7. And out of these 7, 2 would do harm. 2 would actually intensify your inflammation. 3 did very well and decreased that, and couple had no effect, right? And this is already from pre-selected group, right? So, so one has to be careful and do the preclinical work like we've done before proposing that specific strain cultivar would work, right? Do not judge just by cannabinoids.
You just walked into my next question, which all the viewers who wish they had access to you will be watching this. Other than high CBD, I will ask you because I know that's what people will ask us. Doctor, I live in California. I have a lot of dispensaries around me. I'm worried about COVID. What should I go by other than just saying a high CBD strain?
Right. Well, just to make it sure, I'm a medical doctor, but I'm not licensed to practice, and I cannot make any medical advice or not. I believe that high CBD, high terp profile strain is better. So if just a high CBD is of concern, then I would pick the variety that has a higher fragrance, right? So because in general, higher terps varieties have a stronger effect.
You mentioned you didn't want to say a high THC because you didn't want patients to get that high effect. But what did THC in your study show with COVID? Anything as far as antiviral properties? If someone didn't mind getting really high, would THC also help? Or are you just saying don't use high THC because of the high effect?
Right. So I have to be careful answering this question because there are some things that have been published, or in that paper that we have released, we do not report separately THC or CBD, right? Okay. And therefore, what I would be saying, how should I say? I would be saying something that people have not seen the data for, right? And Yes, there were varieties that were high THC that worked quite well, right? But the reason, again, we did not want to focus on them is that we did not want people that would take a medicine be repelled, let's say, by medicine and not take it again, right? Every doctor that we talk to in Canada or US has the first concern is, will my patient take it? Right? So because in order for medicine to work, you have to take it regularly. You cannot skip, right? So, and a lot of patients that haven't seen it or haven't tried, if they try once and it doesn't work, they feel uncomfortable, tingling, or whatever, they will not take it anymore. And that means the medicine will not show its potential. So to cut this and answer your questions, yes, THC works, not all varieties. We haven't used a THC dominant cultivar, but one-to-one, let's say initial 6-7% of THC or CBD in the flowers work as well as high CBD.
Let me ask you a question can I ask a question about terpenes for a second here, Doctor? And I've talked to a few other cannabis experts, scientists, about terpenes and the role that they play in this plant. Can you describe the relationship between the terpene makeup and other cannabinoids like your CBD, A, N, G, ABC, 1, 2, 3? I'm sorry.
Right. So if you look at biochemistry, the initial precursor somewhere very on the top of the pathway is the same. So the rule of thumb is, again, don't quote me on that, but if the variety is high in cannabinoids, typically it's high on terps, right? Then specific terp that is produced, that of course depends on the availability of many enzymes, and that's where cannabis gives a wonderful opportunity to have, because it has such a broad number of varieties. Imagine even if you take 5 to 10 major cannabinoids, right? And if you take 5 to 10 major terpenoids, the possibilities of the ratios and presence of one or another are almost endless, right? You may have thousands of different possibilities. So therefore, you may find nearly always you find the variety that works well for your conditions. So typically, cannabis works well for conditions that are involving chronic inflammation, right? That's where cannabis thrives, I believe. And some terps directly influence cannabinoids. Some terps actually can bind to the same receptors, right? So they can bind to CB1 or CB2 receptors or any other G protein coupled receptor and have either identical effect or skewed effect. So it's basically, if you have a lock and you have a perfect key, you open it fairly quickly and the result you enter, right? You may have a terp that can bind and the key would kind of stuck, but then finally work, right? So effect would be slightly different, but similar. Or then you may have a combination when two molecules compete. That's why you say you take CBD and THC, right? CBD is a partial agonist of THC. So the higher CBD in the variety, the more chances that the effect of your THC will be altered, right? It may be altered that you will feel less high. It may be altered that it will be less pain killing. It may be altered it will be more pain killing. And that depends on all other molecules are in there. So that's why cannabis is extremely difficult to figure out in terms of what exactly is an active molecule.
That's right.
I guess I have to ask, Doctor, here in America, I live in a state, not in Massachusetts, but if someone says I can only get legal access to hemp CBD with almost no THC, is that as good and should I use it? Or how does the hemp CBD play into what you think of the THC CBD 1-to-1 ratio?
Curt, it's a brilliant question. And I love your American hemp over our Canadian hemp for one specific reason. Our hemp industry was sort of, I shouldn't say it was more established because you guys started growing hemp in 17th century, something like that. But most of our industrial hemp varieties were a classical industrial hemp. That means tall, stocky, typically low fragrance, low CBD, so pushing 2% maybe in flowers, and therefore very low terps. But you guys registered a number of varieties. I know in Oregon, for example, that are very high CBD and therefore high in terps. So the chances that they would work more efficiently than our industrial hemp are much higher. From the varieties we have published, there was 3 or 4 that are industrial hemp, right? But those were not industrial hemp, that classical industrial hemp that registered in Canada. We are only now preparing them for registration. And those varieties had higher level of CBD and better fragrance, and they work more efficient. So in short, if it's the right variety, it doesn't matter whether it's a hemp or marijuana, as soon as it has molecules that work. If it has high CBD, it has to be tested, of course, because likely not all of them will work.
You know, you mentioned testing, and I've got just enough knowledge to be dangerous about the endocannabinoid system. And every human has, or every mammal has, an endocannabinoid system. And every time you try a different strain, even if you try one or Curt tries one, I try one, it's going to have a different effect because of our internal endocannabinoid system and how it balances. So how in the world can you do all this research and then come back with findings about specific strains when you know that one, if I take it or Curt takes it or you take it, it's all going to have a different effect on all of us? You talk about a challenge. This is probably the most challenging plant in the world, yes?
Right. Well, you opened the Pandora box, right? So because, of course, well, even if you look at, at any trait, it's a numbers game, right? So if you imagine you have an extraterrestrial landing and, I don't know, let's say in Sweden, and concluded, well, all humans are 180, blonde, tall, blah, 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 right? So, but no, right? So unless you take a representation of everyone, you would not be making an average, right? For any if you want to register a drug, right, so and get a DIN number, you have to do a clinical trial in specific population, right? So if I want drug to be sold in Japan, I better test it on Japanese, right? So the variation in our response, like the way cannabis works, it starts from first how it enters in our organism. So the variability is enormous. Well, it depends how you take it, whether you smoke it, you inhale it, it's sublingual, it's intestinal, so smoking and taking a gel cap, the bioavailability would be different from 70, 80% down to 5-7%, right? So when you ingest it. So the variation also between two people, maybe one would have 5% bioavailability, another one would have 20% bioavailability. Not only genetic makeup, but so-called epigenetic makeup. It means environment. And environment would be as simple as whether you ate a fatty food or not, right? If you ate a fatty food, you will double or triple your bioavailability. That means you need a 2-3 times lower dose to have the same effect. And in addition, all the genetic variation among human, sex differences, whether you're healthy or not. There are a lot of diseases that have either lower endocannabinoid system operation or higher. So in ideal world, you have to know this, right? So you have to take a buccal swab or blood test and see what's the health of your endocannabinoid system. What receptors do you have expressed, right? So based on this, you can make a prediction on the dosage. Even then, the doctors advise to titrate, right? So every clinical trial almost starts with low, goes high, and then as soon as you start feeling uncomfortable, you return one step back and use the one that is high enough and gives you still a good effect. So combination, and it depends not only how it gets into your system, how it works on your receptors, but how quickly it is out, right? So metabolizing enzymes are very different. You can have 20-fold difference in metabolism. That means if I take 10 mil, and I'm just exaggerating, right? If I take 10 milligrams of THC, right, and I will feel high let's say within, I don't know, an hour, right? And then in 2 hours, effect is gone because my metabolism's eliminated it, right? But you may take the same dose, you may get either faster or later, and it will last for 12 hours, right? So because your metabolism is so slow that your system cannot basically kick it out of the organism very quickly. So enormous variations.
Doctor, you mentioned, this wasn't about going viral and being famous. You needed funding and you need more funding.
Right.
I think your study is very important to get U.S. Federal legalization of the cannabis plant. If someone is watching this, how can they contact you? How can they get you funding? How can they communicate with you to get this further along?
Absolutely. I'm not sure whether, well, preprint should have the email there, right? So you can get in contact with me by email or look me up on LinkedIn, right? So under my name, and I typically respond to every person. So if I did respond, that means I was overwhelmed. Probably I'll respond tomorrow or day after, right? So, but yes, I want opinion of everyone, even if it's just a statement that, I have this and use this and it worked. I would glad to hear from you. If you're a doctor, so just want to say hi and say what you do. I'm not in position again to advise doctors what to do, but I would love to hear their stories. If you're out there, a businessman, an influencer, or an investor, whatnot, again, we have all the mechanisms of using your help, right? So to advance this as far as possible.
I hear start low, go slow, and remember that this is truly a plant medicine, and you are self-medicating. So you're actually acting like your own guinea pig when you ingest this stuff and take this stuff. Real quick, we've got COVID-19. I think everybody recognizes it attacks the respiratory system. I'm not a scientist, but I've read all about COVID-19. Is there I want to talk to you about the way to ingest the cannabis plant. A lot of people still, the majority, use it and smoke it. They'll inhale it. They'll ignite it and then inhale it into their lungs. There are others out there that use tinctures. There are some that use gel caps. You even mentioned that as well. Is there a type of titration that is more effective or less effective, or again, does it come down to the individual's metabolism and use?
Right. So again, it depends on different disease, right? So if you strictly talk about COVID, there are a number of so-called gateway tissues, right? So if you're not diagnosed yet, so if you want to prevent yourselves, then use as mouthwash, a gurgle, for example, as well as a gel cap or oil, probably be the most advisable, right? So, if the person is healthy, there's no point of inhaling this, right? So a mouthwash and gurgle would prevent, again, this is a hypothesis, has not been done on real humans, so I have to make disclosures that people don't run and start doing this, right? So, but that's what I think is going to happen. If you have a positive symptom, if you have been identified to have a disease and your symptoms are still mild, I still believe that the same combination, mouthwash, gurgle, and oil would be the best, because mouthwash and gurgle continuously expose. We have a great, basically, ring of immune health, let's say, right, to tissues in our throat, and washing and continually exposing them would have a tremendous effect on ability to reduce infection and whatnot. If if the symptoms are associated with already with lungs and whatnot, this is extremely difficult question to answer because it may harm people, right? So unless I identify all the blood parameters, the oxygen, and whatnot, I cannot say whether inhaling would work. I would definitely not smoke it, right? So it's just counterproductive. Inhaler may be good, right? So, but it would depend if the lungs are still reasonably healthy and whatnot. So, unfortunately, there is not a simple answer in here.
No. Well, it's a very complicated plant. There's no simple answers, right?
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Well, Dr. Kovalchuk, I want to thank you for taking the time. Your study is awesome. We encourage people to continue to support research. And if you can't get it done in the United States, look north of the border, because there are guys like Dr. Igor Kovalchuk that are just waiting for you to write a check so he could do more research on the benefits of the cannabis sativa plant. Dr. Kovalchuk, best to your whole family. I think that you should start recording your family dinners, because I'm guessing that would be very interesting conversation amongst all your researchers and your wife and daughter and the whole nine yards. So again, thank you very much for joining us on We Talk Now.
Thank you very much, guys. Have a good one.
All right, and that'll do it for another edition of We Talk Now. I am your host, Jimmy Young, the founder of Pro Cannabis Media.
And I'm Curt Dalton from Cannabis.net.
Remember, it's a whole new world of weed out there. Use it responsibly. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. We Talk Now, We Talk News, and In the Weeds are all available on most major podcast distributors like iTunes, Spotify, Google Play, and our friends at clnsmedia.com and our flagship, Cannabis.net. So subscribe, share, and like our videos on all the social media networks out there, including LinkedIn,
We are Pro Cannabis Media.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Weed Talk Now. This week, we talk with a very special author. His name is Dean Matt, and that is coming up on Weed Talk Now. But reminder, this is a weekly podcast that you can find on all your podcast aggregation networks. And a reminder again, I'm your host and founder of Pro Cannabis Media, Jimmy Young.
And I'm Curt Dalton, the founder of Cannabis.net.
And we welcome in Dean Matt, the author of a very good book that both Curt and I have both received. It's called Gone to Pot. Welcome to the show. And it's all about the cannabis industry. His name, of course, as we mentioned, is Dean Matt. He's the author, but he's also a former CFO of many, many companies. He's worked with two legendary entrepreneurs one of them is Brad Jacobs from United Rental. The other is Wayne Huizenga, who made his money in waste management. And he's also owned a few sports teams along the way. Dean Matt is from the great state of Illinois. Dean, welcome to We Talk Now.
Like everything about the intro, but the great state of Illinois is kind of a stretch.
It's amazing. That's part of your book. You call it the most corrupt state in America. Are you sure? Can we debate that?
Yeah, there's not much debate in my mind.
But you went to the University of Chicago. You live in a suburb of Chicago. I don't want to name the name, but it begins with an N. And you know what? You love where you live, right? I mean, you have an opportunity to live anywhere you want, Dean. Why still in Illinois?
Good question. We got one foot out the door. If I had my way, I'd be in Arizona. My wife's dragging us to Florida. We got a little place down there already. So we'll probably do one of those 50-50 things, just enough to tip the scale so we have residency like Trump in Florida.
There you go. And there's no income tax, right, in Florida? Isn't that what? I knew there was a reason there for sure. Dean, the first question I'm going to ask you is about why you did this book. You had no reason in the world. You were retired. You have your wife alongside. You go flying all over the world. You could go pretty much wherever you want and do whatever you want. Why in the world did you get into the cannabis industry?
Yeah, great question. So I was retired 2 years ago at this time. And as you said, I've been flying since high school. And my wife just took up golf 5 years ago. So we just been golfing and flying. So finally had some time on our hands, and the phone rang in the summer of 2018, and the company needed a CFO. And ordinarily, I would say, no thanks, or listen a little bit. But this is the cannabis industry, so I know nothing about it. I know nothing about a lot of the industries I go into. I kind of think that's an advantage, and I was intrigued. At that time, guys, you got to remember, at that time, July of 2018. The industry was exploding, right? Tilray was $300 a share, and that was the time I was in it. So it was a great time. I was hired to take this company public as their CFO on the Canadian exchanges, and it intrigued me. It was definitely a fixer-upper. I've taken companies public before, but that's why I got into the industry.
Gotcha.
Dean, yeah, your book is fascinating because you're an outsider with a long business history that came into the industry. So if I go back to the Big Bang moment, the moment that shook the world, where were you when? Bruce, Canopy, they get over $4 billion from Constellation. Where in the process were you? What did you think of that deal? And kind of how did it affect what you were doing?
Yeah, so that happened about a month after I started with this company in Chicago, which was an MSO. We had 6 or 7 operations and 50 legal entities in half a dozen states, with a lot of acquisition prospects as well. Everyone was throwing money at us, so that's kind of where I was. And when Canopy got the big investment, that was a shockwave throughout the system, as you said, and the valuations just went up exponentially overnight, way ahead of themselves. But I think the people in the industry, the guys that are running these MSOs, think about it. I mean, a lot of these guys haven't worked for anybody else before. They haven't worked in corporate America. In the company I was at, I was the only one that actually worked in corporate America. So to some extent, people thought that this was normal, and they haven't lived through the internet era, as I have, and other .com bubbles and Bitcoin bubbles and things like that. So the problem I think that happened to the industry is that money was flowing too freely. I mean, I've been in companies where I've struggled to raise $2 or $3 million. It took all summer to do. We got $100 million in a month and a half, and I didn't even have financials to give to anybody. So it was just definitely, as you read my book, it was Green Acres or the Wild West. I felt like Mr. Douglas in Hooterville. But that's probably one of the worst things that happened to the industry is the free flow of money. And these investors should have known better.
But they didn't, and they still threw millions of dollars at inexperienced management teams, speculative enterprises and business models. How in the world did they get these people to do that?
Well, so since I was with this initial company, in 8 months, we ended up not going public. We ended up selling to a company instead. And after that, I spent now, I'm still consulting and an employee in various companies. Spent all last year on the West Coast, California, Nevada, Arizona, Oregon even. And that's when I started to write my book on the plane, because it's like one of these things to shake your head. As you mentioned earlier, I worked for a couple entrepreneurs. So that's my reference point, So I'm not easily impressed with anything going on in the cannabis industry, and I don't think investors should be either. There's a lot of people that's working very hard, you know, they're busy doing this and that, but you know, right now, I don't even know if the industry's in investment grade. I do think that mid to long term, the prospects for the industry are great. I mean, just great. But as with any land grab opportunity, you've got to have people that have been there, done that before. And I think that's one of the flaws, Jimmy and Curt, that we've had in the industry so far. There was no math done. It was the Wild West. It was spending other people's monopoly money. You know, so investors basically came into these companies and told the CEOs, hey, I want you to get in there. I want you to take this company public, and I want to flip it. You know, so it was in and out. You know, that was the expectation. And these guys have never run public companies before. Just thought, oh, it's easy. How hard could an audit be? You know, that's why I go in there. First thing I did is I hire a room full of auditors. I said, guys, we got 2 or 3 years of financials to get done. Well, will that get done next month? No, it's going to take time. So they're just very, very naive about what it takes to run a company with many shareholders or take a company public.
You just mentioned it actually in your answer that you like the industry and the future looks bright. It's going to lead to my next question. We have an article up on cannabis.net saying there will be another bubble. When U.S. legalization happens, it's going to change the UN drug treaties. You're going to have the G20 countries all be able to grow, produce, sell legally. And with a couple $1 trillion looking to invest, we will have another cannabis bubble just based on supply and demand of numbers like you talk about in your book. Do you agree or disagree?
You know, Curt, I haven't even thought about that far out. I mean, that makes those numbers make my head hurt. You know, so.
And you're pretty smart, so.
Well, I really haven't even thought about that. But I will say that a lot of these companies thought that they could be all things to all people. I mean, a lot of these companies today, in the last year and a half, before this bubble burst, ran out to Colombia and they wanted to go to Greece and they wanted to go all these different countries. And I'm like, guys, there's a lot to do, you know, right back here in our own backyard. There's no need to do that. And that land grab mentality is really what's caused the prices of these acquisitions to go through the roof. I read about many of these failed acquisitions and these just stupid prices that people have paid for acquisitions. And right now we get what we paid for, you know, 90% down on the stock market right now. And I contend and make a lot of predictions in the book until we really get some people that have been there, done that before in the C-suites. You know, right now there's a lot of lawyers, there's a lot of donut shop owners and things like that. But and they built something. They built something of value, just not of the value that they think it is.
I love some of the expressions that you use and some of the things that you bring up in this. The land grab strategy was one, and Company A, how they had a $30 million valuation mistake, I thought was a great story to start with. But due diligence, OG, which I thought was a strain of cannabis or old guy, and it turned out it's original gangster, no idea. They don't know what they don't know. Can you talk a little bit about that statement? Because it is a theme through a lot of these experiences that you've had.
Yeah, and I like to differentiate because I think I do a good, I may be wrong, I think I do a good job of knowing what I don't know. I'm not the guy to talk to about should cannabis be a legal product, the health benefits of cannabis, the different strains, how to grow. I'm not that guy, okay? But I'll go toe to toe with anybody about why the industry is in its sorry state right now. You know, so there was a lot of just naiveness, naivete in these owners because they've never run anything before. And if you think about it, Jimmy, on one hand, the best thing that some of these guys have done is they've never worked for anybody before. Why is that? Because they don't know red tape. They just plow through a brick wall. It's not elegant, it's not efficient, but they kind of charge ahead and get it done. So a lot of these guys get high marks for that. But then the worst thing that they've done is never worked for anybody before because they don't know fiduciary responsibility and transparency and what audits are for and how long audits take. So, some of the naivete I've seen is that thinking a 2-year audit for a company that's got 6 operating companies and 50 legal entities could get it done in a month and a half. I mean, that's just wishful thinking. They just don't know, those types of things.
one company, Dean, you mentioned by name in your book and went on record was MedMen and Adam Bierman. Obviously, I think the latest is they're trying to seize his house, the creditors, and kind of what's your opinion today on MedMen's future and what they need to do to turn it around?
Yeah, so what I write about, I've never met him. You know, I've seen the legend. I've read a lot of the stories. I've seen a lot of the interviews, and he was a rock star in the summer of 2018. And investors who should have known better let their guard down, just like we've seen in the internet era, for instance. But, you know, the come to Jesus was in November of 2019 when they put out a press release, you know, our results aren't going to be that good and mea culpa, and, you know, we're going to get cash flow positive. I was just on Harvest's analyst call yesterday, same thing there. We're going to, you know, be profitable. You know, we'll see. Maybe but the question is, why haven't you been profitable all along? What's, you know, so they finally realized that, you know, cash is a scarce resource and it's not infinite. And again, that's the lack of them operating, lack of their operating experience in the past. You know, Brad Jacobs, the guy I worked with, we took a company public. It was a garbage company. He ended up selling that company for $2 billion, and it was a roll-up, a land grab in different geographies. And after he successfully did that, I mean, he walked away from tons of acquisition potentials. A lot of these guys don't. It's a bidding war. I've run mergers and acquisitions for a $13 billion division of a huge food conglomerate at one time. And, you know, I can't tell you all the math that I did on those deals, you know, but here it was very emotional. We're just going to pay in stock. As I write in the book, these guys wouldn't know how to put pencil to paper and figure if they're overpaying or underpaying. And their investors were pushing them just to go out and cast your net and get as much land as possible. That strategy only works if you know how much cash you're going to be burning. And if you look out over the horizon, you know, there was none of that in the companies I've been associated with. There was no looking ahead. You know, it was like go, 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 go. And so when you overpay for acquisitions, you know, this is the result.
Hey,
I think one thing you didn't talk a lot about in the book, but now after I read the book and finished it, I'm curious. The black market, how much of a force and impact is this having on sales, and how does eventually this game end? Is it federal legalization, or how does the government get a hold of and slow the black market down?
Well, I spent a lot of time out in California last year, and again, I don't know it as much as other people know it out there, but I think the takeaways are, I mean, I know investors that just say, you know, I'll pitch them a deal or whatever. They'll say, is it California? I say, yeah, I don't want anything to do with it. It's just an intangible right now. But I think what's happening, not only the black market, but taxes as well. So California, the prices are being affected by the black market and by taxes. And the same thing here in Illinois. You know, our mayor of Chicago and the state of Illinois think they're doing good things by having some high taxes so that they could rake in the revenue. But I think what they're doing is just prolonging the black market. You know, you want to pay, you know, twice as much at a legal store as you would with your neighborhood guy, you know. So that's really prolonging the issue. And then the issue of oversupply and demand, you know, and we're seeing that in Canada, and the companies are just falling by the wayside right now. But, you know, I think there was a rush in Illinois, for instance. They had 60 medical dispensaries, and then seemingly overnight, everyone that had a medical dispensary gets an adult use license. What a windfall that was, you know. And I think the rush is that the state of Illinois was looking for the path of least resistance so that it could start raking in tax revenue. And another thing that kind of exacerbated here in Illinois is us old white guys, all the old white guys that had, and some of them aren't that old. Oh,
he's looking at me. He's looking at me.
You can point at me too. But,
OGW.
Yeah, but all that did is entrenched old white guys in owning these licenses, you know. And I write in my book, I think it's going to be very tough for social equity participants to have its intended effect now. And I was just on a call last night in Maryland. The same thing's happening.
Hold that thought for a second. A reminder, you're watching and listening to Weed Talk Now, our weekly podcast with interesting people in the cannabis industry. Dean Matt, the author of Gone to Pot, certainly one of them. And we are also available on all your podcast aggregation networks as well. And you can find us on all those social media outlets that are out there, including your YouTubes, your Facebooks, your Instagrams, and your Twitters. That's where you'll find We Talk Now and Pro Cannabis Media. So as I was mentioning, and you mentioned old white guys, it's old white guy guilt that is driving a lot of this industry because of what we've done to people of color in this country. It's horrible and horrific. It's part of our history. And now, you know, you see a lot of these lawmakers saying, oh, we want to expunge the records of the people that have been most affected on the war on drugs. Well, that's great. Expunge the records by all means. But you must give them an opportunity to get into this business. And everything is working against those people. You talk about it in your book. How are we going to get out from this, or is there going to be funding available specifically targeted for the economically empowered groups that are out there that want to get into this business? And again, every state is different, Dean. You know, here in Massachusetts, we'd love to wave the liberal flag, but our governor shut down the adult use recreational industry because of COVID-19 and let the medical community continue. You're always fighting against that stigma that has been around for 80 years. And the people that have paid the price in that 80 years, it's time for them to get a shot at this. Are we going to see that?
Well, I think I just heard just within the last week, I think Illinois is putting, as you mentioned, a fund. I think they're putting together a fund of $30 million. I think that's a way to go. I write in my book, I think the deck is stacked against social equity applicants. First off, here in Illinois, they announced this program in a new round of licenses in October of last year, and they gave everybody 90 days to get their applications in, meaning that they had to be in by January 2nd. So all these social equity applicants are getting excited, but I think the deck has been stacked against them because they don't have the experience in writing a winning application in 90 days. They don't have the contacts. Financial strength so they're going to get points for being social equity, but I think those points are going to be trumped by the experience, the entrenchment, you know, of all the people that already have stuff. There is local rule where a couple aldermen in Chicago have said, I don't care if you want a license or not, unless you're a social equity applicant or associated with that, don't plan on opening your store in my ward, basically. So there's much more that's needed, but it's pervasive throughout the country as far as I can tell.
Yeah, and then you brought up in your book the straw man too. Companies who are going to be tempted to get the token person to get that license or get that delivery, and then either move them out or kind of let them be a figurehead and run it beneath them.
Well, that's commonplace. I mean, I know that the companies I was associated with had to apply in Ohio and Pennsylvania and all that stuff. But the problem I've observed is that they'll go cut a deal. Hey, I need boots on the ground in Ohio. You're a very wealthy person out there. I'd like to put you, and you're a doctor or whatever. I'd like to put you in my application. Well, what's in it for me? Well, we'll give you a cut or whatever. And these deals were never formalized. So lo and behold, if the company wins, now the guy in Ohio's in the bird's eye seat. Says, well, hey, I know we talked about I'll get, $250,000 for being part of your application and helping you win it. But you know what? I'm going to hold you hostage, and now I want $1 million. And again, that's just inexperience. You don't go into these arrangements unbuttoned. You don't expose your shareholders to the whims of some nut job out in Ohio or Pennsylvania that's going to hold you hostage. I mean, that's just management 101.
Speaking of Management 101, and another thing that we picked up in your book, and I'm going to give you kudos for this. Your author's notes, if you just put a thing together of all your author's notes, that is great reading unto itself. And the one that I love the best, okay, is $1 million for a logo, okay? And then you decided, wait a second, you're crazy. Go give $200 to the local high school art class and we'll use a logo from them. Great idea. I love anything giving back to youth. And I've always said you give a kid a chance, they'll blow you away with their ability. And then your author's note, to this day, I kick myself because you could have gone to a grade school and got it done for $50. You still feel the same way about that?
Yeah, well, it just shows you how cheap I am, basically. Basically. The viewers will have to read that, but I did try to make the book humorous to keep people laughing instead of crying, because there's a lot to cry about. I'm not kind to a lot of people in the book, medmen, as you mentioned earlier. You know, I don't, who knows if they're going to survive. They had all sorts of problems, you know, that you read from the lawsuits. A lot of the info from the book came from publicly information lawsuits. But I did put some things in there just to keep people laughing. You haven't mentioned what I think about Captain Sully Sullenberger. I don't think much about him.
In my notes. I have it in here. You are in there. It is between golf and Sully. You're in my notes. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, just to go off tangent a little bit, my wife loves the movie, and she loves Sullenberger, and Tom Hanks made a movie. I said, you know what? What's so hard about landing a plane on the longest, widest, flattest runway ever? He didn't have any choices. He either crashes into buildings, right, or lands in the Hudson. Or he did it. Big deal, you know.
But we have to premise this. You've been flying since you were in high school, correct? I think you were introduced to it by your dad, yes?
Yes, yeah.
And you own a plane. So you are a licensed, experienced pilot. You know, for those of us who have really only been passengers on planes, and I have been in a few small planes as well, it freaks a lot of people out. But isn't flying a simple concept about when it's air and gliding through air? Isn't that how you fly?
I couldn't even tell you. I look at 747s. I'm like, how the hell is that thing getting in the air? You know, I don't know anymore. But a lot of pilots get in trouble because they get in over their head with weather. For instance, you know, I'm instrument rated, so I could fly in weather. But everyone's got to have their personal minimums. You know, my wife and I are going to West Virginia next week, and you know, I could fly in the clouds, but if the ceiling's too low, you just got to choose not to do it. I looked on the internet the other day on one of these sites, and people were complimenting this pilot. They had a video of a pilot landing, or a plane landing on a highway, a crowded highway, and he didn't hit anybody. And dozens of comments. This guy's an excellent pilot. Wow, this guy is really. And I'm like, this guy's an idiot. He ran out of fuel. I mean, so, and to some extent, it's like that in the internet business. Everyone's looking at the hard work that's being done, but you step back and look at the big picture. I'm a tough grader. You know, I don't grade on a curve. You know, you could put your money in cannabis. You could put your money in food manufacturing, you know, but there's not a good reason over the last year to put your money in cannabis until you start getting boards that don't give hall passes anymore to inept managers, you know, and we're seeing some of the C-suites starting to be cleaned out, and we're seeing a lot of focus on profitability. You know, it's all talk right now. Mm-hmm. I think these companies still don't have any trust yet of the investing public and the equity analysts that follow their stock. There's a lot of skepticism on these calls, you know. And they've got to have a couple quarters of being able to look ahead and meeting their projections. And with COVID now, it just makes it all that much more difficult to do. But the top line's still growing, and I'm sensing that there's an emphasis now on cost where there wasn't before. It was all top line revenue.
Gotcha.
On the calls you're doing, you're hitting all my questions. How is COVID affecting this industry at the 50,000 foot flight level from what you're hearing and talking to people?
So what I'm hearing is that the basket size is generally bigger. There was a big push when this thing first started out, and everyone got excited. Oh, you know, cannabis is recession proof. Look at what the revenues are doing. Well, it was pantry loading, right? Everyone was kind of loading up. Still to be determined, I think, if people whose spendable resources, whose extra money, do they want to spend it on cannabis? I think that jury is still out, but they do go curbside. All these companies are attacking this with curbside delivery. To some extent, it actually is more efficient because people are spending less time nosing around in the dispensaries, and they get on the phone or make their order and they just pick it up curbside. So to some extent, it's a little bit more efficient at the dispensary level. The basket size is larger because they don't make as frequent trips there anymore. So I've heard that quite a bit as well. All the companies are kind of managing through and kind of reinventing themselves. So I don't know if this has been a huge impact either way, but that's what I hear is going on.
Do you think, I know there was I think Aurora just came down and bought a US CBD company, and there's kind of this is going to happen now a lot more. This is how Canadian companies will get their foothold here. Agree or disagree?
I haven't thought through that, so I guess directionally it makes sense that that's how they could get their foothold here. So I guess I would agree with that.
Okay.
Let me ask you a question about the Safe Banking Act. You mentioned that at the tail end of your book. We know that the most recent COVID-19 recovery bill in Congress right now has an amendment in there that includes the Safe Banking Act that flew through the House about, I want to say it was like 5 months ago, but of course, what did you say? Cannabis is dog years. So do you expect that the Republican-controlled Senate is willing to give the Democrats a win by getting the Safe Banking Act as an amendment in this time in our history right now?
Yeah, I don't know if they will or not. As the whole bill, from what I hear, it's going to be dead on arrival. I don't know if they're going to resurrect pieces out of it. I do write in the book that, I think the industry will be safer. I think everyone agrees with that. You can't have delivery drivers riding around, with $50,000 of cash. So there is banking that's needed. I tell a couple stories in the book of how it's impacted some companies I've been associated with, and what a waste of time for CFOs or people in the accounting. We must have been pitched. I'm still getting pitched. Oh, I've got your solution. I've got your credit card solution. I've got your ATM and banking solution. I ask for two things when people call me up. Can I get a routing number and a checking account number and a debit card? Yeah, we could do that. Well, I tell in the book, after analyzing and trying to vet these people out before spending time filling out forms and things like that, I still wasted tons and tons of time because these guys never came through, guys that I thought I really vetted. So I'm just skeptical. And the guys that don't deliver these products right now, it's all alternative banking and stuff like that. But CFOs, controllers throughout the country are just wasting a heck of a lot of time trying to find the right solution. And I'm sure there's a right solution out there. I just don't have time to find what that is. But that's needed in the industry. Everyone agrees with that.
Well, I think you're right. I have friends who work at Visa and MasterCard, and they're the same way. You'll see these emails, and I have the solution, and you ask Visa and MasterCard directly. And now I think Visa US bought Visa International a few years ago, so it's real cleaned up. Like, in no way do we authorize from us what do they call it, a code for cannabis sales in America. But you'll get 10 emails a day that says we can do it. It's all legal. And you're absolutely right. So I think there is some cleanup more to do on that side. If you look out and had to throw a dart or your own investment money, what niches or areas of the industry do you like 24 months? What piques your interest now that you have this much experience?
I don't like MSOs. Let me start with that. I think
do with what you don't like, and we'll get to what's left.
Right. Yeah, I mean, we'll have to do it that way. I think the MSOs just overextended themselves. I mean, even you hear Acreage and Harvest talk that, you know, we stopped this deal with Verano. We're going to concentrate on a smaller footprint. And I think there's some merit to that, you know, unless you got guys at the top that have been there, done that before, you know, then cast that net. But we don't in this industry right now. So concentrate on making yourself profitable and then expand from there. I think that's a good strategy. There will be consolidation that continues in the industry by definition and necessity. A necessity because people are running out of money. People are not well funded. I do write in the book just a couple products I've kind of been somewhat associated with. You know, there's tons of, I had one come across my desk today, a CBD, you know, company. But these guys had no experience in the industry. It was evident from looking at their 90-page deck, you know, that they had no experience in the industry and don't know the extent of the competition that's out there. CBD cigarettes, I've associated with a company that does a lot of work on CBD cigarettes. There could be some merit to that. When Las Vegas opens up, consumption lounges are you know, on the uptick as well. But I think the last chapters of my book, I write that the industry needs to quit running trick plays and just blocking and tackling.
Right.
3 yards and a cloud of dust for now.
Vince Lombardi would be proud of you, for sure. Absolutely. Let me ask a little bit. You're wearing your shirt. I want to get into the love of flying you have, mucho dinero. You've got this 50 states, 50 rounds of golf in 50 states in 50 days. Is that on hold because of COVID, or are you still moving forward with that?
It was on hold because of cannabis. So we were, you know, getting sponsors and trying to get teed up. We've been in touch, my wife and I, in touch with Guinness World Record, you know, to get that. We know all the specs and trying to line up the golf courses and the hotel sponsors and things like that. And then I got involved in cannabis. So that's been on hold for a couple of years. In the meantime, I've had hip surgery, and, you know, who knows if I'll be able to pull, you too? Yeah. Who knows if I'll be able to pull that one off anymore, but it's still a dream of mine to kind of get that done.
Yeah, I had my left hip done twice over the last 7 years now, and it's good now. I can give you some hope. And usually it takes a full year for you to get back to where it used to be, if that gives you any hope moving forward. Yeah,
no, I'm moving. I had it 6 months ago. I'm moving around pretty good.
Are you playing golf yet? Are you playing golf?
Oh yeah, playing golf, but not running. I used to run, and I kind of miss it. And I think the knees and my hips go. Right.
There's an imbalance now. You're going to have an imbalance, and hate to talk about my body, but you're definitely going to have issues with your S1, L5 right at the top of your tailbone, because that's where the balance is between your hips. You know what I'm saying, right?
Yeah. I think if we're going to talk about old guy problems, we're going to lose half our audience.
Different podcast, right? Let me ask you, Dean. So you were saying you want to see the quality in the C-suite before you get excited or would make a good move. Let's play fantasy CEO like they play fantasy football. Give me a couple names in your wish list that if you saw we're transitioning to a cannabis or CBD company, you'd say, oh, I like him, or that's good.
Oh, I mean, I wouldn't even get down to the name level. I mean, it's even more basic than that. Do you have any experience in corporate America?
Do you have a college degree?
Well, no. Again, these guys that are in there now, some are lawyers, some are entrepreneurs. These, you know, kudos to them. They work hard. They put the industry on the map. But it's the Peter principle. You know, they don't have the experience in running multi-state operations with 2, 3, 4, 500 employees. You know, there's quite a big difference there. They don't know how to scale. Here's something that happens in all the companies, not only in the cannabis industry, but I've seen this elsewhere as well. These companies traditionally underinvest in the back office, HR, finance, accounting, etc. I had 3 people in my accounting department when I started with this $30 million company. 3 people in 6 different states. You know, the mindset just isn't there to scale a company, and you got to spend some money on some costs. You know, a lot of times the entrepreneurs, because that's the way they're wired, unless you're unless you're selling something or, whatever, you're a cost to me, and I want to minimize those costs. So, Green Thumb, for instance, they've got 30 people in their accounting department. We were about the same size, although we weren't public. We had 3. So that math just doesn't work. And I see that all across the board. Look at what's happening. You don't have enough people in your HR department. Everything is done on the real thin. You're going to have lawsuits. You're going to have shareholder lawsuits. You're going to have employee lawsuits. When we tried to sell our company, the first thing that a couple public companies asked me for is projections. Dean, can I see your projections for the next year? I said, we don't have any. That's just like, you got to be kidding me. But that was life as normal in the company I was associated with. So they got to spend more money to scale.
Are we in a perfect storm right now for this kind of business venture? You've got a industry that's being projected in the trillions. You've got very little knowledge about what works in the industry as far as what is going to be profitable. And Curt talks about this all the time. Nobody in the cannabis industry has made any money yet, right, Curt? Isn't that what you say a lot of times?
Unless you're touching the flower.
Right. Okay. Or you got in really early. And now, because it's a cash economy and you've got the male ego gets involved with this too, not just in the business corporate space, but also in the local legislators and the host agreements that are out there just waiting to be manipulated, if you will. Are we seeing that perfect storm, and is it going to change in the future, and how might it change in the future once you clear out some of these young people that are in there just getting funny money thrown at them? Monopoly money, I believe, is how you refer to it.
Yeah, well, I think the companies I'm associated with have always kind of been, the most successful ones have always been run by the numbers. I mean, Waste Management was run by the numbers. Every month we went into our next level up, our regions, and our results versus budget, our actuals versus budget were reviewed. What's going good at your company? What's going bad? How you doing spending on CapEx? That's running a business. These cannabis companies are slowly getting into that mode where they are really running a business. We had to know our numbers. We had to know what our bogey was, etc. I'll contrast that. I'll add. I was with an international airline caterer that was losing millions of dollars a year, and I'd go out to see the New York kitchen, for instance, and I'm talking with the chef. And the chef's like, "Oh, Dean, I just found this great bakery down in Soho, and I'm going to bring them into. I like their little croissant that they use. We're going to put it on the Air France plane." I'm like, "Wait a minute, Pepe or whatever his name was." I said, "You've got 13 bakeries that you're dealing with. I don't want another one. I want you to get that down to like 5." And save some money. You just don't understand all the costs. And to some extent, that's the way it is with the cannabis companies too. Everyone's an artisan. The growers are the chefs, are the artists, are the artisans. My flower does this, and that's good. But what's the strategic plan in running a business? So the C-suites need to give these guys more directions. I want you to develop one new product next year, or this. And your yield has to be here, and your cost per gram has to be here, and everyone's got to understand that. We're not there yet in the industry by a long stretch, but we're starting to get that awareness.
Dean, all you got to do is pay with stock. That's, as you say in your book, it's not real. Just pay everything with stock. Who cares? That's a great part.
Yeah.
One of the companies that you talked about, and I got to bring this up again, was the company that had the liberal vacation policy of up to 8 weeks in a year. Now, when I read that, I almost blanked myself, because I'm like, how can you get involved with a company like that that's run by a bunch of 20 or 30 somethings and wants to give out 8 weeks of vacation a year? A perfect example, again, of mismanagement in the cannabis space, right, Dean?
Yeah, I'll let your viewers read it for themselves, but it had to do with an HR policy where the owner thought the person that was running this policy was doing it, I'd say, kind of normal, but she was not running it normal. She was giving the store away. I mean, she was giving people 8 weeks of vacation, and the owner didn't even know. Well, that's not running a business, right? Running a business, there's got to be meetings, there's got to be accountability, there's got to be review of the financials. And if the owner is not doing that with his team, you know, the owner can't scale a company to be a $200 million company by himself. You know, you've got to have that team beneath you, and it's just not in some owners' DNAs. You know, some people have their thumb on the cash register, and they do a good business, and they understand all that stuff. But if you're going to achieve a $200 million company, you got to develop a team, and that's just not in these people's DNA.
That's too bad, because it's still supply, demand, cash flow, and costs. I mean, basic business 101, yes?
Yeah, there's a lot of business 101, and in the case of that vacation example, it really was absurd what was happening. People were getting 8 weeks of vacation. They were cashing out their vacation. I mean, they thought they were working for the government, for crying out loud. You know, it was just nuts, and it was going right on underneath the CEO's nose, and he didn't even know it. And there's basic internal controls that auditors look for. And if you're going to run a business, you just got to have basic internal controls and checkpoints. But if you're too busy running around overpaying for acquisitions, and you don't meet with your people and have the right accountability and infrastructure and internal controls, this stuff goes on. And shareholders, you know, think that they're investing in well-run, well-oiled companies and their money's safe and all that stuff. It's not. A lot of companies I've been associated with, there's been no accountability. As you mentioned earlier, people have overpaid for acquisition. Nobody knows but the owner. And there's a ton of wasted money. Now, there's going to be wasted money in startups. You know, don't get me wrong, but just the misuse that I've seen of investor money and the waste and the kind of the secrecy is just absurd.
Does big tobacco, big pharma, or big alcohol come rolling in here in a year or two? And you know, the C-suite of R.J. Reynolds, is that in the future, and would that clean it up?
Yeah, it's going to happen. I don't know when, but when I was with Brad Jacobs at United Waste Systems, we bought mom and pop landfills and hauling companies in the most out of the way places. You know, Upper Peninsula of Michigan, the backwoods of West Virginia and Kentucky. We did the hard work that no one else wanted to do. We got our systems in place, and we put a nice bow tie around them. And now a bigger company is interested in the package that we created, you know. So they're not interested in little onesie twosies, but we were able to get, you know, some critical mass of companies to do that. And I think that's what the cannabis, the ultimate exit strategy is going to be. But Philip Morris and all these guys, the big tobacco and big alcohol, it's, you know, they look down at it and say, it's a freaking mess right now. You know, you better get your act together. There'll be consolidation, you know, where maybe there's 24 MSOs in the company, in the country. Maybe there'll be 3 or 4 good ones. And as the consolidation starts to mature and they have confidence in the numbers, we still don't have confidence in the numbers. Look at all the layoffs and the write-offs and all that stuff. Even though these are audited people, these are audited companies if you're public, right? But there's no confidence in the number. But yeah, I think you're a fool to not believe that they're going to come in at some point in time. And
what's your prediction on federal legalization without getting political and presidencies and re-elections? What's your, if I said, when's it going to be federal legalized, what would be your answer?
I know the answer. It's in the book. Go ahead.
Yeah. Well, I may have changed a little bit. I said within 5 years, but you know, let's say Trump's elected another 4 years, maybe it doesn't happen during his term. You know, maybe it happens after that. There's been a lot of discussion on the analyst calls about if COVID-19 accelerates this or not, you know, and I think if people that are emotionally vested in the industry, this is going to accelerate it. And there's some merit to the argument. There's also merits to the argument that it won't accelerate it at all. So I think everyone's hopeful. I think that's what happens a lot in the cannabis industry is run so much by emotion and happy talk, and there's just a lot of fundamentals that are still missing in the industry right now.
If you could give advice to entrepreneurs that are looking at you right now on a Zoom call, what would be the first piece of advice you'd give us as we start our venture in this space?
Go in with your eyes wide open. I mean, even though I wrote a book on the most absurd things I've seen in the industry, I've seen it in other industries as well. But don't go, from a banking industry where everything's buttoned up and there's procedures, probably overkill, right? If you've never worked in entrepreneurial startups before, this probably isn't for you. On the other hand, this is an industry where you can make a big impact, to help move the ball forward.
Right, which is what we're trying to do actually here by telling the stories of the cannabis industry through their own words. And I think even someone like you, Dean, who wrote this book, through your own observations of the industry with your depth of experience, there's still hope for this because it still goes back to fundamentals of like, let's see, we need to bring in more revenue than we spend, right? I mean, that's about as simple as it gets.
Yeah, I mean, there's that, and I know the companies I was working with, I would say, we got to take a stock compensation expense hit, and they were like, oh, this wasn't on my radar screen. So you got that level of naivete, where people should just know better, and it'll take a little bit of time. It's getting better. Have we bottomed out? I'd like to hope we've bottomed out. Back in December, January, it really couldn't get much worse. There really wasn't a lot of good news. Some of these stocks just within the last month are ticking up a little bit, but I don't get excited about week to week or month to month. I kind of look out, maybe by the end of this year, the industry be a little bit more stabilized, but it's going to take, new people to come in and put some internal controls and procedures in place. And acquisitions, which were a fad a year and a half ago, people are getting a little smarter at it right now. They understand they can't overpay. The math doesn't work.
Is your phone still working, even though you have this out now, published?
Yeah. I have my wife start my car.
But I love her.
You do love her. I know you do, because you travel everywhere with her.
Yeah, well, it's funny. 80% of the feedback I'm getting is like, man, you nailed it. Yeah. This stuff's going on in my company. I thought this was all normal, and it's really been an eye opener. And then the 20% of the people that probably have a contract out on me are in the C-suites of the companies I'm talking about now. But again, I have no ponies in the race. I've got some investments in cannabis. I continue to consult and work, and if nobody wants my advice, I got other things to do. So I'm not getting emotionally tied to this anymore. I kind of wrote in my book too that I was emotionally tied in the internet days, and I said, boy, I'm not letting my guard down again.
You learned your lesson from the .coms, right? Is that pretty much what that was? Yeah. Well, appreciate the lessons you've shared with us today, both on this show and also in your book, Dean. I really enjoyed chatting with you. But before you go, okay, I'm not going to ask you your top 10 golf courses, but I will ask you your top 3. And I think I know one of them. What's the top 3 golf courses you've played?
I don't know if I want to go right down to golf course, but I will tell you areas. So my wife and I went out to Scottsdale and Sedona last year. Of course, Scottsdale, Arizona golf is great. Love it. Michigan's got some good golf courses as well. But the up-and-coming go-to destination is Branson, Missouri. There are about 5 golf courses down there. And your viewers could look up Big Cedar Lodge. The guy that owns Bass Pro Shops, Johnny Morris, basically built this whole resort. Tiger Woods has one golf course in the United States that he's an architect of, and it's opening up as we speak down there. And I was down there last year, and my wife and I are going down there again. It's near Branson, Missouri. But Big Cedar Lodge is my #1 place to golf.
Not Pebble Beach.
I've walked it, but I've never played it. Yeah.
Oh,
All I can tell you is I had a dream round at Pebble Beach on a 75-degree, no-wind day, okay? And walked up to and I got the last tee time. The golden handshake, are you familiar with that? You know what the golden handshake is to starters?
No.
You give a starter $100 and you can walk on pretty much.
Okay.
Not that I did that, but okay. And I was told to do it, so I did. Plus, I knew the starter. That helped. It's still the Carmel, California, and the Monterey Peninsula is still the most beautiful spot on earth that I've seen so far. And being able to play golf there was a religious experience. It really was amazing. And I totally want you there, Dean. You have to go. And then you call me after and you say, you're right, that's better than, was it Branson, Missouri? Where am I going?
Yep. It's a golf
Big
destination.
Cedar Lodge, Jimmy. Big Cedar Lodge.
Big Cedar Lodge.
Big Cedar Lodge, yeah. So you must be a better golfer than me, Jimmy, because sometimes I go out and the best 2 balls I hit all day is when I step on the rake in the sand trap.
There you go. That's a great line. I would say just remember the average round of golf in America is 100, and I hit it right on the nose with a 12-foot bender on the 18th hole at sunset at Pebble Beach. It was magnificent, let's just say. And the book that Dean Matt has written is gone to pot. Welcome to the Blank Show. So, Dean, again, thank you so much for joining us here on Weed Talk Now. Once again, remember, it's a whole new world of weed out there. Use it responsibly. So for Dean Matt, Curt, I'm going to do it for you too. For Curt Dalton, the founder of Cannabis.net, I'm Jimmy Young from Pro Cannabis Media. Thanks for joining us. And again, remember, use it responsibly.
We Talk Now, We Talk News, and In the Weeds are all available on most major podcast distributors like iTunes, Spotify, Google Play, and our friends at clnsmedia.com and our flagship, Cannabis.net. So subscribe, share, and like our videos on all the social media networks out there, including
We are Pro Cannabis Media.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to another edition of Weed Talk News. I'm Jimmy Young, the founder of Pro Cannabis Media.
And I'm Curt Dalton, the founder of Cannabis.net.
Well, Curt, your buddy Bruce Linton is back in the news again, and once again, he's heading towards the unemployment line, although I think he can handle it. He parts ways with Vireo Health. Tell us about it.
He gets fired more than anybody I know, but a lot of the news this week, he left Vireo Health's board. Depending on where you read, a lot of the haters are saying he got fired again. What a clown. But if you read the story in the press release, it was on mutual terms. And you'll notice that Vireo got a funding round of $7 million because Bruce Linton was joining their board, and Bruce put in $1 million of his own money. Now, whether they disagreed a little later on the direction and what they should be doing, but Vireo, which by the way is under $1 stock, would have never gotten a $7 million funding round, 8 if you count Bruce's money, without Bruce Linton's name attached. So I think he did his job. It was mutually, terminated, no hard feelings. So I think the outpouring of he got fired again may be a little bit of a reach.
And he's still going to stay on the board of directors until July. So I think Bruce is going to turn out okay, right?
I believe he's still eligible for Canadian unemployment because he was on it after Canopy, but I got to check the rules.
It's like he needs to be on unemployment. All right, let's move on now to the news out of New York City. And here is Deborah Borchardt from the Green Market Report.
Thanks, Curt. Thanks, Jimmy. This week, Schwazi, formerly known as Medicine Men Technologies, said it was buying 14 Starbuds locations in the state of Colorado. The deal is valued at $118 million, and the locations are said to have earned $50 million in annual revenue. Grow Generation announced a $35 million stock offering this week, but the company hinted at potential COVID troubles ahead. The hydroponic chain store company said that COVID-19 pandemic had caused disruptions in its supply chains and delays in the delivery of inventory. They also said that the pandemic has affected their customers' financial condition, resulting in reduced spending for the products it sells. California cannabis manufacturer ProCan Labs announced a victory in its monumental lawsuit against the state of California. The company was found to have $2.6 million in black market cannabis oil, as well as $620,000 in cash. Now, the judge ultimately ruled that the cannabis oil was legally produced, as well as ruling that the Controlled Substances Act does not apply to licensed cannabis businesses in the state of California. This ruling could affect other companies' asset seizures in the future. And that's it for this week. I'm Deborah Borchardt from the Green Market Report for Weed Talk News.
Thanks, Deb. Now we turn to the state of Nevada and their governor, Steve Sisolak, who is going to be Steve D'Angelo's best friend because, as you know, D'Angelo is heading up the Last Prisoner Project. His goal is to get everybody who's in jail, convicted of a cannabis crime, out of jail. Well, Steve Sisolak, the governor, is going to attempt to do just that in his state of Nevada. He is putting a provision out there, a resolution that would basically eliminate the convictions of low-level cannabis possession, and it would be a blanket pardon of thousands of Nevada prisoners who would then be freed and have their records expunged. This is a great set of leadership in a state that's already, of course, legalized the adult use of cannabis.
Yeah, and a big congratulations to Steve. He's worked so hard on this and continues to work every day. It's called the Last Prisoner Project. If you haven't heard of it, look it up. It's trying to get nonviolent cannabis offenders out of jail because COVID should not be a death sentence for people serving time for either selling or growing marijuana. And it's really starting to gain traction to the point of one of our biggest stories this week on Cannabis.net was our Elon Musk interpretation of his pro-cannabis tweet saying, why are people sitting in jail for a crime that's now being sold by really C-suite executives that are mostly men and mostly white. So, you know, Elon's riding a huge wave of excitement with SpaceX, and he does this tweet. You have Steve with Last Prisoner Project starting to get traction. So let's get those people out of jail. COVID is not a death sentence if you're in there for a minor offense.
And the next set for Nevada is a meeting on Wednesday, June 17th. and they are really focused on getting out of jail all these cannabis possession crimes for under an ounce. He says, this will clear the state for thousands of people who bear the stigma of a conviction for actions that have now been decriminalized. So go get them, Nevada. That is the place to go. And you already mentioned Steve D'Angelo and the Last Prisoners Project. You know, Steve, what's your name? You're Curt, right? Not Steve. I thought I was talking, we're talking about Steve. One of the interesting things that's happened during this whole Black Lives Matter movement that's been going on is the coming together of whites and blacks and other people of color who believe that what's been going on with law enforcement needs to change. And they're talking about defunding police now. And I'm not quite sure I agree with the defunding. Instead of, let's take the funding that's there and put it into educational practices to open up more communication lines. That's what's happening now, and that's what people are talking about. And it's interesting to me that cannabis is right in the middle of it. You know, you get what I'm saying, right?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know why you wouldn't want to live without police. Living in the purge every day sounds great. I mean, let's just have no police and put on the masks and the chainsaws. So you're right. Pretty sure.
We've got the masks.
We're already wearing masks.
Pretty sure we're defunding the police department is not the answer, but putting resources to education and re-education, obviously, of people that have been in that industry for a while is the right answer. I do not want to live in a world with no police, or go rent The Purge 1, 2, and 3, and you'll see what happens.
Exactly. And anyway, that is the story here in the United States. Now let's go north of the border to Solomon, Israel for the MJBiz Daily International Report from Canada.
I'm Solomon Israel from Marijuana Business Daily International, and this is the Weed Talk News Canadian Cannabis Report. Cannabis grower Hexo Corporation posted an improved third quarter, but still is not turning a profit. Hexo's net loss was 19.5 million Canadian dollars. Executives said the company's plan to achieve positive adjusted EBITDA by the end of this year depends on the rollout of new retail stores in the company's two largest markets, Quebec and Ontario. And in Ontario, legal cannabis sales were worth almost 400 million Canadian dollars in the year ended March 31st. That's according to new data from the cannabis wholesaler in Canada's biggest province. Recreational cannabis sales were dominated by flower at nearly 80%. Brands from Aurora Cannabis took the top 2 spots for sales for the fiscal year, both in-store and online. And Canadian cannabis producers exported a record amount of medical cannabis in 2019. The total, about 3,740 kilograms, 160% more than 2018. But that medical marijuana didn't exactly go all around the world. About 94% of it went to just one market, Germany. You can read all those stories and more at MJBizDaily.com. That'll do it for this week's Weed Talk News Canadian Cannabis Report. I'm Solomon Israel from Marijuana Business Daily.
Now that coronavirus has wiped out in-person conventions, MJBizCon is putting on 2 online events from June 29th to July 1st, MJBizCon Direct and the Hemp Industry Daily Conference Direct. Both events will feature industry speakers and exhibitors, and you will be able to communicate directly to them in this state-of-the-art online event. You can register today at MJBizConference.com. That's MJBizConference.com.
Thank you very much, Solomon. Looks like Germany is the place to be if you want to get involved with Canadian cannabis. In the meantime, back here in the United States, High Times is back in the news again, and they have just recently come into a $25 million licensing deal for 3 markets. So once again, the High Times leadership, Adam Levin, is making it happen and now getting a cash royalty to get back into this dispensary world, right? Isn't that where this is? They're taking over a bunch of dispensaries over in California.
And some in Michigan, but really, Jimmy, fall for it once, shame on you. Fall for it twice. This is literally becoming Lucy pulling the ball out from Charlie Brown every time he tries to kick it. Here we go, pumping up a big deal to get that Reg A bigger and bigger if they can. And then these things, you've seen this, but we're on Rocky 15 at this point with High Times. So it's not even, it will not go through. It is not going to, it will end up being canceled. And I'm just not going to fall for it again. I refuse.
And you are right, Curt. These dispensaries are in Michigan with additional rights in Illinois and in Florida. under that High Times brand. They're still trying to figure out a way to make this work for that brand that is still one of the most recognized brands in the cannabis space. But you are not very confident that they're going to be able to get this thing done.
Well, if you look at their financials, and I think Brian Weiss at the LA Cannabis News had it, they're valuing this deal at 50 or 60 million, and both companies combined stock is worth 11. So again, it's a lot of smoke and mirrors, and I'm willing to bet after I've seen this exact same thing for 8 weeks in a row, maybe 8 months in a row, that this is going to end the same way.
Right. And I'm optimistic. I think it's going to work. All right, let's move on to the head of the NBA Players Association. Her name is Michelle Roberts. She is now joining Cresco Labs as the first female board member of that cannabis company. And that's interesting just because of the fact that the NBA is going to resume play, it looks like, in Orlando at Disney's Wide World of Sports. And Curt, that's a league that has always kind of been pro-cannabis without actually saying so. And now, of course, they're not even going to be testing for it.
Just going to say, you'll also notice that the NBA has said they will not be testing for recreational drug use during this abbreviated end of their season. So if you're Curaleaf or a dispensary near Disney World, you better stock up because you have a lot of guys with money coming.
That's right. And it should be interesting. Once again, though, the NBA showing they're one of the most progressive leagues in professional sports. Do you agree with that?
Certainly on the cannabis side, and also you have Major League Baseball saying they're not going to even test for it if they ever play again, if there is ever another Major League Baseball game. So they're coming around, and the NFL is even, saying that there's a more relaxed policy. So we're getting there. It's just a slow pace.
Well, it took the NFL to finally come around and get rid of the kneeling policy that they had. And we saw Roger Goodell completely reverse. And again, you got to give credit to the protesters to making this thing happen. This movement is happening in this country. And obviously here at Pro Cannabis Media, we support Black Lives Matter way before it was politically happening to talk about Black Lives Matter. We've been talking about this for months.
See, back in '68, when you were in your 30s, I mean, you were there. You were there in Boston too. So, and I give Goodell credit. It wasn't the over gushing apology / come to Jesus moment that maybe some people wanted, but he said he was wrong. They did things wrong handling race and the kneeling. So that's a big move for the NFL to admit to, and it's a start.
That's right. Now, will Colin Kaepernick ever play another down in the NFL? That's the next question. The guy's only 32 years old. Just saying.
He also won $10 million to be a starter, so maybe not.
That's it is easier to just collect those checks and not have to go to meetings every week, I guess, right? All right, let's talk about Washington, D.C. and what is the latest that's going on in our nation's capital. And here is Vote Pro Podcast, Phil Adams.
Hi, this is Phil Adams from Vote Pro Podcast, here with this week's Weed Talk News DC report. A new lawsuit filed against the Drug Enforcement Agency is challenging the legal standard used to ban cannabis under the Controlled Substances Act. Cannabis researcher Sue Sisley of the Scottsdale Research Institute in Arizona has joined with 3 military veterans in filing the suit, saying the DEA has applied the wrong standard for classifying cannabis as a Schedule I drug. Sisley made news recently for her groundbreaking research into the potential benefits of cannabis in treating post-traumatic stress disorder. The lawsuit is specifically challenging the DEA's long-held contention that cannabis has no accepted use in medical treatment. Opening brief is scheduled for August. The coronavirus may have spurred a shift in how Congress views cannabis legalization. Cannabis executives are pointing to signs of a change in attitudes, noting that during the pandemic, half of the U.S. states and D.C. had categorized dispensaries as essential businesses. That vote of confidence, they feel, could prod reluctant lawmakers in Washington to rethink their positions. American Trade Association of Cannabis and Hemp co-founder Michael Bronstein said, quote, "The COVID-19 response has shown just how critical cannabis is to the overall economy and job markets in a number of these states. It's getting increasingly hard for members of Congress to ignore that." That's the Weed Talk News DC report for this week. I'm Phil Adams from Vote Pro Podcast.
All right, thank you, Phil. And you know, I found out an interesting thing about the Vote Pro podcast, which is one of the most highly rated cannabis podcasts in the country. Can you tell me, Curt, there's been 49 states that have downloaded the Vote Pro podcast over the years that they've been doing it, and I believe it's been in 38 countries as well. Can you name the one state in the United States that has not downloaded the Vote Pro podcast?
Oh, Phil, that's a great podcast. If you've never listened, it's Vote Pro podcast. It's highly rated on all your podcast sites. I'm going to guess North Dakota.
And you're going to miss it by one direction. It's South Dakota.
Close.
South Dakota. And sure enough, there's actually an initiative in South Dakota for better marijuana laws. And it is going to be on the ballot in the fall. So we want to wish them good luck. But I want to tell you, based on what their Republican senator said in the Congress today, once again, counting the word cannabis in the COVID Relief Act. Because as you know, we've talked about this, that Safe Banking Act, they're trying to get it through the Senate in addition to the COVID, come to the rescue of people that have been most affected by COVID. And we've talked about this. The Republicans versus Democrats is really bad right now.
Well, I hope all 11 people in the state of South Dakota show up and vote pro cannabis.
There you go. Do you know anybody in South Dakota?
I don't.
I don't either.
People do.
All right. And finally, a survey of Colorado residents recently who use cannabis daily found that, in fact, they believe that they drive better under the influence of cannabis. And in fact, 18,000 residents between the years 2017 and 2019 took part in this survey. And obviously, they're just trying to figure out what exactly is going to happen in other legal states if people are found to be driving under the influence of cannabis. And Curt, you and I are both, we kind of understand that a lot of people do believe that they focus better when they're under the influence of cannabis.
This is a little bit of a split decision in the cannabis community. And on this one, I am actually not a cannabis stan, just saying yay, yay, yay. I do not think you should use cannabis and drive because any level can affect your reflexes. So, you know, heavy machinery and driving is not safe. There are a strong group of people in the community of cannabis that say, I drive better with a few puffs. It helps me focus if I'm anxiety or I'm hyped up. Now, there's a huge difference, Jimmy, as you know, between a few puffs and a 100 milligram edible and trying to drive. So again, now we're getting into this relativity, sliding scale. What's your tolerance? Have you been using cannabis for 20 years? But in general, I do not side with the cannabis stands and say, yes, yes. I say no on this one.
Interesting. And of course, you did refer to my OG status, okay? Recently, you mentioned 1968. You don't remember this, I know, but there used to be a license plate, and it wasn't a license plate. It was like a bumper sticker that said, "Arrive Stoned." And the premise was back in the hippie days of the 60s, you would get in a car, people would be smoking weed, and of course, wherever they were going, they'd end up arriving stoned. It was part of the culture, the rebellious culture back then. But you know what? In time, I think we've all recognized that driving under the influence is never a good thing, especially when you have had too much. But it's that question of what is too much for the regular cannabis user in order to drive safely. And I will say, you know, I've admitted I have driven under the influence of cannabis. And what my biggest issue is, it's directions. Okay, I'll miss an exit. I'll miss something. I'll be a little spacey. I'll have a stone maneuver, and that's dangerous on the road. I get it now that I'm an OG.
Well, I think you're also seeing, you know, we're going to go down this road like alcohol, right? 2 beers affect somebody X amount by body weight and whether they're male or female. But I'm a drinker for 20 years, so I can do 3 beers. And so at some point, we'll get a breathalyzer that gets accepted by the courts. But if you remember the funny scene in the Chris Farley movie where they're stoned with David Spade and they get pulled over, and you know how fast you were going? He goes, 4 miles an hour. So cannabis users won't be speeding and being aggressive on the road. If anything, they'll be old grandmas just putting along at 20, trying to get home and concentrating.
Well, that'll do it for another edition of Weed Talk News. I'm the founder of Pro Cannabis Media, Jimmy Young.
And I'm the founder of Cannabis.net, Curt Dalton.
And it's one of those stories that allows me to repeat this closing line every week. It's a whole new world of weed out there. Use it responsibly. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening.
Weed Talk Now, Weed Talk News, and In the Weeds are all available on most major podcast distributors like iTunes, Spotify, Google Play, and our friends at clnsmedia.com and our flagship, Cannabis.net. So subscribe, share, and like our videos on all the social media networks out there, including LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, the WeedTube, and YouTube. Weed Talk and In the Weeds are two productions of Pro Cannabis Media supported by Revolutionary Clinics, one of the top medical cannabis dispensaries in the Massachusetts area, now with 3 locations in Greater Boston, 2 in Cambridge, and 1 on Broadway in Somerville. Rev Clinics has a patient-first mission. They will customize your needs as a medical patient with the proper titration and combination of strains, flavors, and products. Rev Clinics, where the patient comes first.
We are Pro Cannabis Media. We are Pro Cannabis Media.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to another edition of Weed Talk News. I'm Jimmy Young, the founder of Pro Cannabis Media.
And I'm Curt Dalton, the founder of Cannabis.net.
And today we're going to start in the state of Nevada. Last week, you might remember that we were talking about Governor Steve Sisolak. He was ready to expunge the records of 15,000 prisoners in Nevada jails for cannabis possession crimes. Well, guess what? This week, he did it. And you have to congratulate Governor Steve Sisolak for expunging all these records. And we know one guy in particular who's very happy about what this governor did. Right, Curt?
Yep, and that's Steve D'Angelo with his Last Prisoner project starting to take a real strong effect, especially on the West Coast. California has similar action going. Congratulations to Nevada. It's the right move. They've been ahead on the cannabis curve since day one, and it's all good news coming there.
Now, this makes the Last Prisoner project, like Curt said, and Steve D'Angelo very happy. And in fact, their executive director, Mary Bailey, also commented that the Last Prisoner project is in the late stages of developing a robust re-entry program to build pathways to employment in that industry. So that's also good news, because not only are they getting them out of jail, but they're going to give them an opportunity to work in cannabis and in the cannabis industry. I think that's what this is all about, Curt.
Yeah, and it's really important, because anyone knows that goes for a re-entry job, especially at what they're looking at, it's a background check. And if you have a criminal record or a felony offense, a lot of systems kick you right out. And I know there's federal legalization, bandbox, that's trying to get people a second chance and get them in even with an offense like that. So let's kick it over to our Wall Street super reporter, Deb Borchardt, for our Weed Street Minute. And of course, what's a Weed Street Minute without some more High Times drama? Over to you, Deb.
Thanks, Curt and Jimmy. Happy Juneteenth to all. Well, the earnings continued to roll in this week. M. Hardeen Group reported its 2019 results of $26 million for revenue. This fell from last year's $27 million. The company also reported a whopping net loss of $267 million for the year. Fire and Flower reported that its revenue for the first quarter, fiscal 2020, came in at $23 million. That was way better than last year's $9.5 million for the same time period. MedMen co-founder Adam Bierman stepped down from the company's board of directors. His co-founder Andrew Maudlin also stepped down as an observer of the board of directors. And finally, Black Tie CBD has filed a lawsuit against High Times for the cancellation of the Hemp Cup. Apparently, Black Tie paid $25,000 to be a sponsor and hasn't gotten its money back. And that's it for this week. I'm Deborah Borchardt from the Green Market Report for Weed Talk News.
One more business story, and this one's about Pixis International. They were the first big tobacco company to get involved in cannabis. And sure enough, because of COVID, they've had to file for federal bankruptcy. How does a big tobacco company that's an investor in cannabis actually file for bankruptcy, Curt?
Yeah, they were a first mover, but as COVID affected a lot of businesses, unfortunately, that are closing, they were able to get their U.S. assets, the tobacco assets, in the bankruptcy courts, and they left out like the Prince Edward Island and the Canadian cannabis stuff. So this will probably just be a U.S. corporate tobacco type bankruptcy filing.
Okay, so now the next story is, anybody noticed how active former and current professional athletes have been during this Black Lives Matter protests and all the other things that have been going on? And certainly enough, once again, a professional athlete is stepping up and taking the lead on this. And this is Al Harrington, the former NBA player. And he has actually created a fund to help those in the illegal black market get into the legal market. In fact, his company Viola just closed on a $16 million round of investment to help those already existing brands in that illegal market transition over to the legal side. This is actually very impressive, Curt.
It is, and Al Harrington's not just blowing smoke, if you know what I mean. We did our first story on Al probably 4 years ago at cannabis.net. He has been in this. He has been a proponent of legalization, and now with the latest Black Lives Matter, he wants to create X amount of Black or African-American millionaires in the cannabis industry. So Al is 100% legit, a bedrock of the community in the cannabis space, and kudos for just really putting his money where his mouth is.
Absolutely. And now for the cannabis news out of our nation's capital, here's Phil Adams from the Vote Pro podcast.
Hi, this is Phil Adams from Vote Pro Podcast, here with this week's Weed Talk News DC report. The Library of Congress, as part of its Chronicling America project, is exhibiting a series of racist news articles from 1897 to 1915. Originally published as warnings to white America about the menace of marijuana, these articles are filled with stories of drug-fueled violence, promiscuity, and insanity that were used as anti-Mexican propaganda and helped drive the eventual criminalization of cannabis. Chronicling America is sponsored jointly by the National Endowment for the Humanities and the Library of Congress. Two members of Congress, Representative Earl Blumenauer of Oregon and Representative Barbara Lee of California, are circulating a letter urging fellow legislators to consider cannabis legal reform as part of the effort to promote racial justice. The letter states, quote, "We have seen for the last 50 years the cannabis prohibition used disproportionately against people of color, especially young Black men. In particular, the letter recommends passing the Marijuana Opportunity Reinvestment and Expungement Act, or MORE Act, which has cleared the House Judiciary Committee and now awaits a floor vote. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention has received hundreds of comments related to the use of medical marijuana for the treatment of pain. Seeking input from the public on preferred options for pain management, the CDC fielded comments from more than 200 patients who use cannabis for acute and chronic pain, many saying that cannabis not only relieves their pain, but also reduces or even eliminates their reliance on NSAIDs and opioids. The comment period ended at midnight on June 16th. That's Weed Talk News DC Report for this week. I'm Phil Adams from Vote Pro Podcast.
Our next story has to do with Mad Money, Jim Cramer on CNBC. He interviewed the current CEO of Canopy Growth. His name is David Klein. And David Klein on that show predicted that legalization will be coming to the United States in the year 2022. Wishful thinking, Curt?
Well, here we go. Bring out the dartboard, Jimmy, because now we're going to start playing the odds on a presidential election coming up and how that turns out. We're going to play the raffle board on a COVID spike, the severity of it in the fall. And then we're going to see how much money is left in the state coffers with tax revenue and what the jobs outlook look like. So I think David moved it up maybe a year. But again, with what's going on, your guess is as good as mine. We can make an argument it should be done immediately. But if David is sitting there and looking at the kind of the tides at a different level than we get to see, let's hope he's right.
All right. And again, one more note coming from the state of Louisiana. They have made an amendment to their medical marijuana laws. And now doctors in that state can actually encourage and not necessarily write prescriptions for medical marijuana patients, but they can now say, you know what, you should take a look at this for one of your ailments, and it may just help you. And that's actually a subtle but a big movement that doctors actually now can talk about, not necessarily prescribing medical marijuana, but using it.
And really, I'm more surprised about the state. When Louisiana starts expanding what they can do with medical marijuana, Louisiana, maybe this is what David Klein's looking at and watching the tide saying, boy, you get Alabama, Louisiana, who's left? Maybe we will see legalization finally across the board.
In the meantime, in the country just north of the border in Canada, they've got legalization going, and they are making a boatload of money on exports. Here's Solomon Israel from MJ Business Daily International.
I'm Solomon Israel from Marijuana Business Daily International, and this is the Weed Talk News Canadian Cannabis Report. Canadian cannabis oil was approved for export to 17 foreign countries in 2019, Marijuana Business Daily has learned. Australia was the top destination, followed by Germany and Denmark. All told, Canada exported more than 5,000 liters of cannabis oil products during the year. Hexo Corporation has sold off a greenhouse it acquired in 2019 as part of a $263 million deal to acquire New Strike brands. The greenhouse sold for about 10 million Canadian dollars. It's the latest greenhouse to be closed or sold off by major Canadian producers, including Canopy, Aurora, and Tilray. And Aurora president Steve Dobler is retiring at the end of this month. He was one of the co-founders of Aurora back in 2013, along with former CEO Terry Booth, who stepped down in February. Aurora is still looking for a new permanent CEO. That's it for this week's Weed Talk News Canadian Cannabis Report. I'm Solomon Israel from Marijuana.
Now that coronavirus has wiped out in-person conventions, MJBizCon is putting on 2 online events from June 29th to July 1st, MJBizCon Direct and the Hemp Industry Daily Conference Direct. Both events will feature industry speakers and exhibitors, and you will be able to communicate directly to them in this state-of-the-art online event. You can register today at MJBizConference.com. That's MJBizConference.com.
And of course, that MJ Biz Daily Conference is going to be online and should be a good one. In the meantime, the New Jersey legislature will be voting on the decriminalization of cannabis next week. That state has been trying to move towards legalization, but decriminalization is usually seen as the first step. Good news, Curt, right?
Yeah, I know the governor really wanted to push harder for those tax revenues, but like you said, baby steps first. If it's decriminalization, it's better than nothing.
And now let's come back to Massachusetts, go up a little bit on the Atlantic seaboard and talk about the Massachusetts Cannabis Commission. You know, they have a budget of about $200,000 to create public service announcements that are designed to educate the public about how to use cannabis responsibly. And in this particular case, this PSA that they wanted to place on Facebook was about the dangers of making your own edibles and your own concentrates. Because, of course, if you're going to be using combustibles like a butane for that process, you could get yourself in big trouble. What did Facebook do? They took down that PSA. Curt, you and I both know Facebook is not a friend to the cannabis businesses, are they?
Not at all, and welcome to the club. They do not distinguish between a government-sponsored PSA and sites like Cannabis.net or other sites that are trying to put content up. And we've written endlessly about this where, listen, Jimmy, it all comes down to money. And we don't create any revenue because they can't take ads from the cannabis space on Facebook. We take up space in the user's profile where they can be showing ads that create money. So they have no need for us, and we're a pain in their butt. We're taking up space on their server with our videos. We don't create any revenue, and we're hogging up space. So they have zero interest right now until we start paying or allowed to pay by federal law and having our content there. So you'll be shadow banned. If you're not removed completely, as in your page and your post is gone, they'll do what's called a shadow ban, meaning they'll leave you up, but all of a sudden you'll notice your reach will be 1/10 of what it was. It won't go out to many people at all.
And they'll take down a couple of shows like we've done, have had to happen to us in the past. So anyway, that's the way it is in 2020 in the cannabis world. And I appreciate everybody watching another edition of We Talk News. I'm Jimmy Young from Pro Cannabis Media.
And I'm Curt Dalton from Cannabis.net.
Remember, it's a whole new world of weed out there. Use it responsibly. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening.
We Talk Now, We Talk News, and In the Weeds are all available on most major podcast distributors like iTunes, Spotify, Google Play, and our friends at clnsmedia.com and our flagship, Cannabis.net. So subscribe, share, and like our videos on all the social media networks out there, including LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, the WeedTube, and YouTube. Weed Talk and In the Weeds are two productions of Pro Cannabis Media supported by Revolutionary Clinics, one of the top medical cannabis dispensaries in the Massachusetts area, now with 3 locations in Greater Boston, 2 in Cambridge, and 1 on Broadway in Somerville. Rev Clinics has a patient-first mission. They will customize your needs as a medical patient with the proper titration and combination of strains, flavors, and products. Rev Clinics, where the patient comes first.
We are Pro Cannabis Media. We are Pro Cannabis Media.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to another edition of Weed Talk News. I'm Jimmy Young, the founder of Pro Cannabis Media.
And I'm Curt Dalton, the founder of Cannabis.net.
And today we've got all sorts of international business news for you, both from north of the border, here in the United States, and we've even got delivery coming to New Jersey. We've got labor unions issues. It's almost like the cannabis industry is a mature industry, Curt.
Oh, it's going through quite a hard landing and a few hard bounces, but we're getting there.
And perhaps the biggest story, Curt, outside of this Acreage and Canopy growth one, is your pal, your friend Adam Levin. He's not really your friend, I know, but he's from High Times. He's calling the shots, and it looks like High Times actually closed on the Harvest deal.
Yeah, Jimmy, it looks like things got adjusted to about 8 locations, and it's a $61 million deal roughly. The interesting part is on that kind of deal, I think it's about $1.5 million in cash and $60 million in stock that doesn't exist and may never exist. So 98% chance, this deal was paid for with paper money that doesn't exist. Stay tuned. Stay tuned.
Do you get an ATM card with that? All right, that'll do it for that high times thing. Now let's go to New York for the Green Market Report. That's our pal, Deb Borchardt, with the big deal on acreage and canopy growth. Take it away, Deb.
Thanks, Curt. Thanks, Jimmy. And happy Pride weekend, everyone. Wow, we had some big news in the cannabis industry this week. Canopy Growth and Acreage Holdings have changed the terms of their deal. Now, you may recall in 2019, Canopy Growth said it was going to buy Acreage Holdings for $3.4 billion. Well, a lot has happened since then. Now Canopy is only going to pay those shareholders $37.5 million, and they changed the terms of some of the shares. Also, CEO Kevin Murphy is out. Aurora Cannabis also announced some big changes. The company's laying off 25% of their employees. Another 30% is going to be cut over the next 2 quarters. And they are closing 5 of their facilities. They're only going to focus on the cultivation facilities that are large and efficient. And Jushi Holdings is buying Pennsylvania Medical Solutions from Vireo Health in a deal valued at $37.5 million. It's expected to close August 20th. This deal is the plan from Jushi to really solidify their holding in the state of Pennsylvania. And that's it for this week. I'm Deborah Borchardt from the Green Market Report for We Talk News.
Thanks, Deb. I guess it's inevitable, Curt, in a very fluid environment in the stock market, whether you're in the cannabis business or not, that valuations are always going to change. And isn't that what we saw with the acreage and canopy growth thing?
Oh, absolutely. And you're dealing with, turbulent times with COVID. You're dealing with marijuana legalization not looking good with, William Barr this week. You have people looking at valuations, not only on like a MedMen, which is in trouble, but you got Gotham Green Partners they sent the debt notice to Ithanis. So we're not through this ugly turbulence, Jimmy. It's going to bounce hard across the bottom of the runway a few more times before we get calm and we get some sort of stability.
It's all about this adjustment deal. All right, and speaking of big marijuana companies, Curaleaf has amended its deal to acquire another multi-state operator, Grassroots Cannabis. Now, that company is based in Chicago, Illinois, and originally that deal was announced in July of 2019 for $875 million, but now with stock prices down and valuations changing, that deal has been lowered to $700 million, with $75 million cash being eliminated. Now, that's a pretty good discount, Curt, isn't it? Saving $75 million on a deal. I'd like to get a coupon for that.
Yeah, you're seeing it where cash is drying up for this industry right now. There's no good headlines for it federally as well. So everything is coming down to cash payments being removed, just like we talked about high times. Curaleaf's removing cash. It's just a really tight cash market. And companies, it's going to be interesting to see who survives here in another 6 or 8 months.
But Curaleaf seems to be very stable. In fact, now their presence moves from 18 to 23 states, with the company now having over 135 dispensary licenses, 88 operational dispensary locations, and over 30 processing facilities and 22 cultivation sites. That's according to the Curaleaf press release. That's a giant of a company right here, and it's in our native Massachusetts.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, they're very stable. They're not going anywhere. They're going to be a player and a survivor. I'm just saying the cash part of it and the access to cash is just not there right now. You're seeing some interest rates like our loan sharks are charging for short-term interest rates to cannabis companies who are publicly traded. So you're seeing huge demand right now. I said, if you need the money, you're going to pay like it's a loan shark. And there's not many companies that are going to come out of that looking good.
Didn't I see a 60% interest rate in some deal having to do with cannabis recently too?
Exactly, and it's like I thought it was a payday loan that gave him the loan, but it's actually a legit person. They just said, "Really, no one's going to give you cash? Guess what? How about this number?" And they said yes to it, and it was only $12 million. That's not a lot of money for a public company. It was only a $12 million deal.
Right, but again, $12 million. In US dollars, Canadian dollars. Anyway, for a perspective on that Canopy Growth and Acreage Holdings deal, let's go north of the border to MJBiz Daily's International, Solomon Israel. Solomon?
I'm Solomon Israel from Marijuana Business Daily, and this is the Weed Talk News Canadian Cannabis Report. Canopy Growth Corporation is amending its 2019 deal to acquire U.S. cannabis operator Acreage Holdings. The original deal was worth about $3.4 billion. The new proposed deal values Acreage at much less, perhaps $900 million, according to one analyst. The acquisition will only be triggered if the United States legalizes marijuana. And Aurora Cannabis announced major cuts this week. The company is laying off about 700 employees, including some executives. It's closing 5 smaller production sites across Canada to focus on growing at larger, more efficient facilities. Finally, the biggest cannabis market in Canada is, at last, starting to get the number of stores it needs to succeed. Ontario surpassed 100 retail cannabis store authorizations this month. That's to serve a population of about 15 million people. To put that in context, the province of Alberta has almost 500 licensed stores for a population of about 4.5 million people. That's it for this week's Weed Talk News Canadian Cannabis Report. I'm Solomon Israel from Marijuana Business Daily.
Now that coronavirus has wiped out in-person conventions, MJBizCon is putting on 2 online events from June 29th to July 1st, MJBizCon Direct and the Hemp Industry Daily Conference Direct. Both events will feature industry speakers and exhibitors, and you will be able to communicate directly to them in this state-of-the-art online event. You can register today at mjbizconference.com. That's mjbizconference.com.
Michigan is updating its labor agreements with cannabis workers. That state has been working under an emergency requirement that required operators and licensees to have a labor agreement in place with their employees. Now, state regulations will no longer require labor peace agreements with employees. Sure enough, there's a Republican-controlled state Senate in Michigan, and one of those state senators, Eric Nesbitt, a Republican, described this whole thing as a mob-style shakedown of these new businesses that are growing. And he said, at least the mob lets you get going first. They won't even issue a license unless you sign one of these labor peace agreements. So, Curt, is this just another example of a new industry kind of sowing its oats, trying to grow and actually get along with its employees, whether they are unionized or not?
Yeah, I think at the $15, $16 level of employees, without federal legalization, this probably isn't needed or a good idea. It's going to add cost. I mean, if you just look at union membership in general at the 50,000 foot level over the last 25 years, as a reason it's just straight down. I don't think we have the pricing power for employees without federal legalization to make the numbers work for a union. It's just too fragmented because of no federal legalization. And remember, unions have been trying to get a piece of this for a long time, in that they wanted that transportation deal in California. They want to be able to transport only in union trucks from a grower to a dispensary. And Steve D'Angelo talks about that. So they're just looking for a way in, but you're right. It feels too early, and it's going to add a lot of cost to those paychecks, which aren't too big. And without being able to get that mass membership, I just think it's a bad idea right now.
Well, it didn't stop the Cresco Labs Illinois marijuana dispensary in Lakeview to unionize. They just announced that just a few minutes ago, and it is the first unionization since the COVID-19 pandemic, and sure enough, workers voted 16-4. They're going to be represented by the United Food and Commercial Workers Local 881. So Cresco, as you know, is a multi-state operator. And again, they're just all trying to deal with these kinds of things that happen in all businesses as they grow.
Yeah, like you said, maybe it's a little too early, where you got to let this industry get on its feet. As you said, there's cash is drying up, interest rates, people are barely staying on. And, you know, we may be at a point, if there's a COVID resurgence, where just having a job is pretty important. And I don't know if unions protecting those rights and really fighting for things is the best idea right now, but they're not going to listen to me. So we'll see what happens.
But anyway, plenty of news coming out of Washington, D.C. this week. I think you know who we're going to be talking about next. The Attorney General, William Barr, has the cannabis industry in his crosshairs. And Phil Adams from Vote Pro Podcast in Washington, D.C. has our story.
Hi, this is Phil Adams from Vote Pro Podcast, and this is the We Talk News DC Report. Testifying before the House Judiciary Committee on Wednesday, John W. Elias, an attorney from the Justice Department's Antitrust Division, told the committee that Attorney General William Barr ordered inappropriate investigations of several cannabis industry mergers. Elias claims Barr ordered the probes despite the fact that the deals in question did not meet the criteria for such investigations, and that Barr rejected the analysis of career staff members that these mergers presented no competitive concerns. The DOJ Office of Professional Responsibility defended the probes, saying that it was reasonable to seek additional information from the industry, and that antitrust prosecutors, quote, didn't violate any relevant laws, regulations, rules, policies, or guidelines. A federal commission, in a rather surprising report, is calling on Congress to promote research into the potential benefits of treating military veterans with cannabis and psychedelic drugs such as psilocybin and MDMA. The Creating Options for Veterans Expedited Recovery, or COVER, Commission was tasked with providing recommendations for better mental health treatments for veterans. The panel, chaired by presidential appointee Jake Leinenkugel, has determined that cannabis and psychedelics represent promising treatment options that should be explored. The Cover Commission report goes on to cite the DEA's Schedule I classification as the main obstacle to further research. A new Gallup survey shows that a majority of Americans now consider cannabis to be morally okay. 70% of respondents told Gallup they believe smoking cannabis is acceptable, while only 28% said it is morally unacceptable. That's a Weed Talk News DC report for this week. I'm Phil Adams from Vote Pro Podcast.
Well, I'm certainly glad that my medical cannabis use is now not considered immoral by most Americans. Curt, how do you feel about 70% of Americans basically saying, you know what, weed's okay now? I certainly hope not, since I take those Tylenol just about every night
You did all three immorals, don't worry.
And finally, one more note about the state of New Jersey. You know, there's only 11 medical marijuana dispensaries in New Jersey, and now they're going to be able to make deliveries. And that's a big step forward in New Jersey, but that's a big state for just 11 medical dispensaries, Curt.
Yeah, and the delivery, this is what we talked about, where the COVID rules that are what's positive about it coming out. These state deliveries and these curbsides won't get rolled back, as Chris Walsh has told us, at least he hopes. And at least New Jersey, I have a feeling there's going to be a lot of miles put on a few of those cars. If they only have 11 dispensaries to service that entire state, you better get your Goodyear and your Michelin contract up, because I got a feeling they're going to be busy.
Well, you know the joke about New Jersey. Hey, what exit, right? They're going to be going on a lot of exits up and down the New Jersey Turnpike. Well, that'll do it for another edition of Weed Talk News. I'm Jimmy Young, the founder of Pro Cannabis Media.
And I'm Curt Dalton, the founder of Cannabis.net.
Remember, it's a whole new world of weed out there. Use it responsibly. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening.
We Talk Now, We Talk News, and In the Weeds are all available on most major podcast distributors like iTunes, Spotify, Google Play, and our friends at clnsmedia.com and our flagship, Cannabis.net. So subscribe, share, and like our videos on all the social media networks out there, including LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, the WeedTube, and YouTube. Weed Talk and In the Weeds are two productions of Pro Cannabis Media supported by Revolutionary Clinics, one of the top medical cannabis dispensaries in the Massachusetts area, now with 3 locations in Greater Boston, 2 in Cambridge, and 1 on Broadway in Somerville. Rev Clinics has a patient-first mission. They will customize your needs as a medical patient with the proper titration and combination of strains, flavors, and products. Rev Clinics, where the patient comes first.
We are Pro Cannabis Media.